What does it look like for us to build a life on the message that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and forever? That's what we're going to talk about today in Hebrews 13. Well, here we are at the end of Hebrews, and what an incredible book this has been. It's been so intriguing to see how this author talks to a people who are just so worried about what's been happening to them and thinking about going back, going away from what God has done for them and walking back to the temple structure. Really an incredible book. Hi, everyone. Jill from the North Woods. How are you doing? I hope that you're enjoying this as we go through the Bible one small step at a time. I hope you know that this has been good for you in reading it slowly. I'm thinking about how we're going to do the Old Testament. And so if you have, what you want out of the Old Testament, drop me a note and let me know what you think about it, because we are going to start that up probably in September. So we've spent 12 chapters now with this writer building this case. Jesus is greater than all the angels, Moses, Aaron, the law system, the priesthood system, better than all the things the priest used to do for the sins of the people. And he is a better mediator than the covenant for a final sacrifice. He's the great priest who passed through to heaven, sits at the right hand of God the Father, sat down, work is completed. But now the final chapter feels a little bit different. There are some real interesting practical pieces of advice that are written here. More, I guess, pastoral. He's laying out his case in all of this, showing who Jesus is. But now what should we do about that? And this is one of the most important, I think, moments in, as a Bible study, right? Or as a sermon, at the end, what is it we're supposed to do? How are we supposed to apply what we just learned? And that's what this author is doing for them. Because theology is hard sometimes to touch to daily life if it is abstract. But when the writer takes everything that we've learned about Christ in this and now says, live accordingly, we're going to go and try to do that. And that's what he does here. So the first verses he talks about, it's very simply, very direct. Let brotherly love continue. That's the important part here. The word is Philadelphia, and we've seen these words before. Remember when Jesus went to Peter and says, hey, do you love me with the self-sacrificing love? And Peter says, I love you like a brother. It's a good love. There's nothing wrong with this love, but it's not what Jesus was asking him. And so we have eros, which is, I guess, you consider to be a marriage or a more lusty type of attraction that is between a man and a woman in marriage. And then there is Philadelphia, which is brotherly love. There's other loves out there. But then we also have the self-sacrificing love that Jesus often talks about. The word used here is the brotherly love, and it's warm, family-like. It's not formal, but it's genuine care for each other. The kind of love that exists between people who belong in a community together. And the writer is saying that this love, it's already there with you. Cool, you're doing great, already there for you. It's an encouragement to keep going. Don't let it fade under this pressure. And you think, well, why would something like that need encouragement? Because if they love each other and they're a good community together, which they seem to be, why is it we feel like we have to encourage that to be more? But if you remember earlier in Hebrews, we start having the seeds that the believers were under strain, persecution, social pressure, loss of business, family, and relationships. And so it's easy for us to love one another when things are good. But when things get difficult and people get stressed, tired, afraid, and maybe just tired of the whole thing, it gets harder. And so the writer just wants to say, you know what? You love each other. Just keep going. And then goes out and even says something about different ways that we can love each other. The first one is about love towards strangers. This idea of loving the stranger was big in Middle Eastern cultures. So that you have a tent establishment, right? You can imagine Abraham with his tents and his sheep and his family and workers around him. And a stranger walks up out of the desert, doesn't have a place to stay for the night. You offer him hospitality, something to eat, so, they're safe for the evening. You hear their stories, you tell them your stories, and that's how information got along. It was a big part of it, and it was really shocking when people didn't do hospitality for a stranger. And it's in the ancient world, like I said, not casual. Travel was really dangerous. Inns were far and few between along Roman roads. Some of them had really bad reputations. Either they were unsafe, unclean, or associated with vice, prostitution, gambling, crime, that kind of thing. And so travelers really needed to depend on the kindness of people who were opening up their homes or their tents or their encampments to them. And so for an early church believer, this kind of caring is important. For any traveler who's displaced and in need, it was not merely just to entertain your friends, but it was extended to people you don't know. Now, the reference goes originally, it talks about how if you do have hospitality towards strangers, you know what? Someday they may be angels. Sometimes they might be part of the angel groups and you don't even know it. And that goes all the way back to Genesis 18, where Abram welcomed 3 visitors near the oaks of Mamre, and the visitors turned out to be divine messengers. And Abraham didn't know that when he offered them a place and offered them care and welcomed them to his tent community. So now we're saying every stranger is not literally an angel, but the point is that each person has value and it's not always visible. Treat people generously because you don't know when you might need that kind of help, but that God has requested you to take care of people who he has placed in your path. I think that this one is particularly hard in our culture. And we say, well, why? We got plenty of food, we have houses, we should be able to take care of people. But oftentimes, people who do this are victims of crimes from unknown strangers. So it gets rather difficult for us. Someone else, one of the commentaries was bringing up the really interesting point that at this time, when Christians and Jews were being run out of communities, and like I said, we are headed to very shortly Jerusalem getting sacked. So these strangers and people who were out in the wilderness needing some kind of comfort were also very oftentimes your Christian brothers and the Jewish community around you. So again, something to remind you, like I said, it's a good point for us because we don't live in that society of kindness towards strangers. And maybe there's, other kinds of kindness as well. That if someone needs a shelter, there's other, possible ways that we can help people who are in need of it that time if they seem like, we don't want to have our homes threatened. You have to remember that at this particular time, these people were living in batches and groups of communities. So if I invited someone into my home and that person ended up attacking me, I'd scream for help and all my neighbors and my workers and my people around me would come running. And so it's a little, I'm not trying to justify it, but like I said, it's hard for me sometimes to parse that in my head. And then he talks about remembering people in prison, and some of them were in prison with you, often mistreated since you also are in the body. So we're supposed to remember them as well. So many people of faith went to prison under persecution. It doesn't happen as often or in the United States, but we're starting to see it happen more often throughout the world, including westernized nations for, speaking God's truth or saying things in the Bible they're going to prison for it. And particularly in places where the religion of Christianity is not the majority religion. So we have to pray for them. And it's we have to remember them so that when we think of them, we pray for them. And it said, just like other people did for you when you were in prison as well. So you're identifying with people you probably knew at that particular time, not some kind of far off distant sympathy, but something that was happening to people that you knew personally in that day. and a genuine effort to feel what they are feeling, to have empathy so that you understand this awareness, this understanding of their suffering. They probably know very well because they either heard stories that were very close to them, they had family members who were probably locked up in this situation, or they themselves were also in prison. And then the phrase says, since you're in the body, is in this chapter. It says, we're all physical. We're all right here. Not spirits. We have physical needs, for food and comfort and shelter. Maslow's, it's called hierarchy, right? That first you have to have shelter, then you have food and water and a place to sleep. We know what suffering looks like, and we are physical bodies. And so that kind of vulnerability is a reason enough to care about our fellow people in prison. And it's important for us to remember, too, that Christ was also imprisoned unjustly, as was John the Baptist and other people who were apostles in that. He goes on to talk about another kind of love, and this is going to be about marriage and faithfulness. There's another kind of love right here, and talks about that God will judge you based on sexual morality and adulterousness. I think people try to break these, types of things into victimless crimes or, crimes. I'm not saying that any of this is crime in legal sense, but we tend to say, what difference does it do what I do? It's a victimless crime. And in that particular case, you'd say, no, it's not, because there's another person involved in that. Maybe if you're married, there's a third person, or if you have a family, there might be 6 people, but it's not victimless, and sexual morality is important. And in the Roman world, it is important because it wasn't a Roman or a Greek standard that was expected to be upheld. Prostitution was legal, was common, it was associated with the temple structures, and it would have violated Jewish law and would have felt normal to the Greco-Roman world. And so that is saying, no, hold on to your marriage. It's precious, valuable, it's worthy of respect. Marriage isn't just a social agreement between 2 people. It is something that God created, certified, and values. There is sexual immorality, particularly when you're talking about in the marriage bed, because it talks about the marriage bed shouldn't be undefiled. Now it's bigger than that. God will judge you. And it's a serious reminder. And you think about even like the structures, is that at that time, if a wife was put aside for a girlfriend or a prostitute, she had no legal standing. And so she would be left destitute, and she might have to work a lot of manual labor, or she would have to become a prostitute herself. I mean, it's not victimless, I guess, is the point. And so now it's even more important. Marriages should be honored by all, he says, and that is important. When we look down on marriage in our culture, it is continuously looked down. And that doesn't mean that we should have a romanticized fairy tale feeling for marriage. Instead, we should say it's a covenant, which means it's an agreement. God created it, and you have to take it very seriously. Goes on to say then what you should not love, which is you should not love money. You should not love the contents of what you own. God says he will never leave or forsaken us. And then when we say that God is our helper, why should we have fears? What can man do to me? And so this is really 2 sort of things that go together. And, I kind of get this one more than anyone. Like I said, when I was reading it, the thought is that I spent my life with like no money and insecurity and being raised in a situation without any security at all. So it's very easy for me to look at my paycheck, my retirement plan as security, because I didn't have it when I was a kid. Now I have it. So my furnace breaks, I can deal with it. I thought today that I busted the electrical system in my garage today, and I was counting up the dollar signs in my head. But I thought, okay, well, even if it costs me a couple $100 to fix it, should be okay, because I have that kind of money to do that kind of a repair. But that's the problem, in a sense, is that we look at that and we think about security. That's why money and fear are sort of set together. it's not just I love money and I like, all the things that money buys and I love all the life that money buys. I think that the flip side is that you realize that a lot of times money can fade away fear because, okay, well, I busted the electrical system in my garage. I could pay to have it get fixed. Now I'm not afraid anymore. So grip of money is not just in the lifestyle it can buy me. It is also in well, maybe I'm not, I know where my security is. My security is in my paycheck. And that can make the heart feel divided. That maybe, oh, sure, God's for me, but I'm secure because I have a bank account. And then, even taking a look at the fear, the people who had persecution lost property, social standing, income. They lost all the things that money can bring. And the temptation is to cling back to it because I lost everything and it was terrible and it was awful. And maybe I'm going to hoard my money. I'm going to compromise my standards. I'm going to let money become the anchor, like I said, of my fearless life. It's understandable. And so the answer is not financial strategy. It is about depending on the promise of God. And like he says in Deuteronomy 31:6, God says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. That is the promise that where Moses speaks to Israel. And before they cross to the promised land, God has been saying, you're my people. We're his people. We're all his people, and he will not forsake us. And the writers of Hebrew claims that still stands for all believers. Just because the sacrificial or the temple structure no longer is in existence, the promises that are still in the Old Testament when it comes to God are still standing there. And it's important for us. It's important for those, and it's going to be for future believers as well. When we look at that, we understand that God will not abandon us. Then it makes me, like I said, think about my own fears, about, well, what if I got laid off? Or what if AI replaced me in my job? Or what if, some financial hardship comes? Again, my security feels like it's in my paycheck when instead it is with God. And the writer quotes here, Psalm 118:6, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear what can man do to me. So it sounds a little bit like the Lord is my shepherd, but that psalm is included. This is the day that the Lord has made. The psalm trusts in the midst of the pressure, whatever kind of day you're having, whether it's a good day, a stressful day, the worst possible day, this is the day that the Lord has made. And the psalmist puts his trust in God regardless of that. It shows that our promises cannot be passive. It cannot be part of resignation. Well, I guess my life sucks, but I guess the Lord makes, it makes the day. But it's a confident trust that in God that he is there on you. It's really easy for us to say that we have to earn our security, like I said, through a paycheck. Instead, what you're already saying is God's already here in this day, and he will already be here for me. Then goes on for another kind of love. It's a love for our leaders. And he said that he already, those who already spoke the word of God, consider the outcome of their ways, their life, and imitate their faith. If you have leaders, the word here is not really talking about government officials, but spiritual leaders like pastors and teachers who brought the gospels to believers. And notice that it's in past tense. So those who spoke to you, some of the commentaries believe that these leaders may have already died, may have been martyred to their faith. And it's a call for them to remember those examples that had happened to them in the past. Be faithful to those people who went before you and strengthen you now. So it's a tricky one because I think that we look at it sometimes in a particular way, and when we see it now, yeah, it's people who are leaders who died. My pastor who baptized me died, and I think of his example oftentimes. You hear me talk about how he talks about my pastor, the perfect grace and perfect justice. That comes from him, and I try to remember that of him. Jesus, he says now in Hebrews 13:8, is the same yesterday and today and forever. This is the anchor to everything, and it means that, human teachings will come and go. Circumstances will get good, bad, worse, better. Cultural changes happen all the time. I think we see that in our lives where we go, well, when I was a kid, it wasn't like this. Governments rise and fall. Leaders, faith leaders will die, but Christ does not change. It is going to be everything. The history of salvation, the plan for our being saved, the pathway to heaven, the moment you are in right now, where you were 5 years ago, and forever, into eternity. Every direction is covered. God is the same. And it's interesting that he places us right after the passage about the leaders, because I think the writer is just kind of drawing a distinction here that the leaders we had in our past, remember, religious leaders, are worth honoring and imitating, but they're not the foundation of it. Christ is the foundation, and he does not shift at all. He's also not going away. And so while we honor those people, we always keep our eyes on God. I think it's easy for us to find, even for me, a pastor you love, you really dig, or one who really speaks to you. But in the end, you're not called to put them at the foundation of anything. Christ is at the foundation. What Christ says goes. You see a lot of, I see on the internet, a lot of pastors who are very popular. And I'm not saying anything about it. They have a good way of speaking about it. But unfortunately, they don't often act very biblically, or they don't have like an education, so they don't know what phrases mean. And it's important that we always measure everything according to Christ. And now it goes on and talks about how that you don't get taken away by strange teachings, by anything, that people get led away, right? We maybe belong to a Bible believing church, and one of those pastors, one of those movements, someone who has money or food or looks really appealing can lead people away, and he's saying don't do it. Don't be led away, because it's good to be strengthened by grace, not by food. Essentially, the physical things around you. Don't be strengthened by them. That it is not helpful for you to go into even following people who are devoted to things on this earth. And that's the important piece, is that diverse and strange teachings probably refer to Jewish ceremonial laws. The idea of eating some kinds of food are good for you and some are not. Some are spiritually beneficial to you and some are not spiritually beneficial to you. But don't go away with those kinds of beliefs, because that's what's going to cause you to drift away from God and from Jesus, and maybe even drift back towards the temple structure because it felt good, to have a Sabbath meal with your family again. Oh, I remember, this is comforting to me. But whatever the idea is, whatever the purpose is, don't fall away for that. What strengthens the heart is grace from Christ. It's going to be not the rituals, not the food, not the additional ceremonies, and not I think too, these leaders who are spouting these things. They may seem very comforting. Christ's work is sufficient. The heart is strengthened by what God has done, not by what people add to it one way or the other. So we should not be led astray in this particular way. It's important, I think, in order for all Christians to look at extra biblical requirements in the Christian life. And we crave them. We find, I see people do all sorts of things that are new rituals, and it's fine. Like I said, if I wanted to, like, let's say every Sunday night, I'm going to sit around, I'm going to light candles, and I'm going to do a few songs and read a few passages, and then I'm going to have a basket here of water, and I'm going to spiritually cleanse myself so I feel, it's one thing, we are people of rituals, but if you're adding to it and saying, this is what saves me, this is what makes me clean, it's not true. Spiritual maturity comes from growing in grace, through the word, through faith, through dependence on Christ, not through practices that might seem rigorous and they're not rooted in the gospel. So if you're doing something rooted in the gospel, that's fine and everything else like that. But people were, in this particular case, we saw the places with Paul, going forward and making up new rituals. In this particular case, these people were going back and looking at old rituals and trying to return to their old Jewish lifestyle. And so then it comes into the last piece, which it talks about there's an altar, who serve the tent have no right to eat. So we'll talk about what that means. The body of those animals whose blood were brought to holy places by the high priest as sin offerings are burned outside the camp. And under the temple system, there would be certain kinds of sin offerings that were placed, that blood was taken into the most holy place. They weren't eaten by the priest. The priest has no right to eat them. And then the whole animal was burned, and it was burned outside the camp, outside the boundaries of the sacred area. So what does that mean here? Because we're sort of drawing parallels, well, not sort of, we're drawing parallels to the suffering that Christ suffered outside the gate of Jerusalem in order to sanctify, make holy the people in his own blood. So in this particular case, like I said, if you're going to pour blood on the altar, initially the priests in the temple period would first try to purify themselves, and then they would work towards purifying their people. All this ritual that was going on was doing that, and then the body was thrown out, cast out, burned outside the city, and this is what happened to Jesus. Outside the city gates, outside the boundary of the area, Jesus was rejected, shamed, executed, put on a cross. That is how a criminal dies. Remember, the point of the cross for the Roman Empire was, check that guy out. Don't become him. He was a horrible, terrible criminal. We put him to death publicly, humiliatingly, so that you don't become like him. The worst possible death. And so in a sense, that sacrifice that was going on inside of the temple was a reflection of what was going to happen to Jesus outside the temple and outside Jerusalem. It is the writer seeing this as a fulfillment of the very same pattern of Old Testament sacrifices, that the sacrifice that was truly dealt with sins was carried on outside the temple. Jesus, the true and final sacrifice, was also taken outside the temple. And then he calls all of us that let's go outside. Let's go outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. So this is a weird invitation, and it's striking. I mean, it's not weird, but go outside the camp too. Jesus was outside the camp. He suffered all these things. You know what? You too. Go outside the social structure. Go outside the place where you feel safe, inside the camp, right? You don't have the wolves and the criminals and the rogues inside of your own little community sanctuary. Instead, go outside there. Go outside of what is considered to be respectable by the prevailing society. Go outside the comforts of social, like I said, approval, cultural approval, and go instead and identify with the one who was rejected. It's hard for us because if we live in a place, and I know that my town doesn't respect the church and doesn't respect church, greetings or, sayings and doesn't respect people who are Christians at all. So I'll just get along with everybody else. And in this case, the Jewish people were being tempted to return to the synagogue system. It's familiar. It's where your people are. You can now be socially safe again. And instead he's saying this is temporary. That safety is temporary. Go outside and bear what he bore. Do what Christ did. And that might include a temporary suffering, punishment, but instead what happens after that is permanent, forever. What Christ's ministry is forever. And so that application is in different forms, I think, for each of us. But it may be the same substance. For me, it's my city, but for you, it might be your work environment or your circle of friends. And saying, that following Jesus means that you are going to be misunderstood, punished, and not approved of. And you will be in the minority. And so, you know what? Choose faithfulness over the approval of the crowd. He says we have no lasting city, and that's what's interesting. We seek the city that is the end of this. We're looking for the city of God. It ties back again to that theme of Hebrews where people are sojourners, travelers. Abraham, again, lived in tents. He went out without knowing where he was going or what was going to happen. And he was looking for a city with foundations. He was leaving a city that had earthly foundations. He is going out of the city and he's looking for the city of God. The saints had faith in the hall. Remember the saints of faith in the hall? They did not receive the promise that they were looking for, but they were glazing at it in the distance. Everything in this earthly system is temporary. The city that lasts forever is the city that God built. The temple, that is temporary, except for the temple that God built in heaven. So that's the important part, is keep looking for what goes out and beyond us. And now we go on and talk about this essentially new sacrifice. Instead of having a high priest who is going to do a sacrifice and do it day after day and has no place to sit, instead now, you know what? We're going to offer the sacrifice of praise, that the fruit of the lips of our praise that acknowledges who Christ is, and that we don't neglect doing good, sharing what we have with others. And those kinds of sacrifices are the ones that are pleasing to God, not the sacrifices that were the old ones, animals, blood, smoke, altar. Those are gone. Under this new covenant, believers offer a different kind of sacrifice. And praising God, acknowledging it, worship is sacrifice. It costs something in our attention. It costs something in reorienting our lives towards Him. Maybe I'm doing something mischievous on the side. It's not very godly. But when I reorient myself towards God, now I am pointing myself back towards Him. Speaking truth about God, who God is, and then give God honor to that, confessing with and declaring openly who God is. We are to praise God publicly about what is true about God. Doing good, again, is practical, active, and it helps people. And it's serving quietly and not waiting for dramatic opportunities instead of the ordinary day-to-day moments of helping people. I was talking to someone yesterday. We were talking about how people will say, well, because I'm justified through grace and my salvation is secured, the whole problem that matters is that I get my ticket punched to go to heaven. And what the author of Hebrews is saying, yes, if you're faithful to God, you do it, and he's saying, yes, God did His sacrifice. It's seated now. The sacrifice is over. But we're not saying what we do is over. Not because we're earning our way to heaven, but because we are going to love people around us. We're going to do good. And that means quietly helping people. And then sharing, having a generosity, getting at that koinonia word, which was a representative of the koinonia church, sharing what you have. Not just charitable giving, but instead, saying we belong in a community and what's mine is also available to you as well. And then the writer adds, something that's interesting, that this is what the sacrifices are pleasing to God. This is what matters now. We are not going to earn our way to heaven through this, but it still matters that we're going to take these new offerings that rise to God like the old incense did. A life of worship, a life of generosity, and a life of faithfulness. That's what's important. Again, not because we're earning our way to heaven, but because we want to be pleasing to God, and it builds us into something else. This is really the weight of what it is. God sees what we do. God is pleased by what we do when we do these things. That's not small, and it's not unimportant. Now, here again, there's a word that is talking about us basically obeying our leaders, submitting to them. They're keeping watch over your soul. And those who have to give an account, let them do it with joy and don't complain about it. There would be it would be no advantage to you if you did. And so the word that actually is about is persuading people with confidence and not grudging compliance, that we have these leaders in place. This word of submit, like I said, is always controversial, but the idea is to yield or give away to. Together, these kind of suggest a posture of cooperation and trust. Doesn't mean that we're being blind if the leader is leading us away. If we are told to do something that God does not want us to do, we don't do that either. But instead, we take our willfulness away when this leader is instructing us on doing it. It's important because this leader is watching over our soul, right? Is basically remaining awake. Think of that idea of the shepherd. That's why we call our own clergy shepherds. They are remaining awake, staying on guard, looking out for the wolves that are roaming around in the sheep. I think the word, the idea is of a sentinel that doesn't rest. And they will have to give an account. So leadership is a genuine weight. They are not just managing people, but they're managing a program. They're responsible before God for the care of the souls in their group. So they are just responsible for it all, not just the people part of it, but the whole system. They are responsible for it. And this is a pastoral concerns that shows them that they do this with joy and not groaning. Don't be grumpy about like, oh, I'm so burdened as a church leader. And it's not unheard of that a healthy church will have leaders that are bad leaders or ones that are so burned out and so tired that they can't function because they're just groaning under the weight of everything. When this happens, it is important that we, like I said, be on their side or help them through this or find another church leader, because it's bad for the leaders, it's bad for the people in the congregation, and it's bad. So this is what we're really looking for from our church leaders. And then he asked people, pray for us. We want to have, I guess in this case, a clear conscience, desiring to act honorably in all things. And he urges all of them to do this in order that he, the author, may be restored to you sooner. Come back to them. So the leader is asking for friends who are going to pray for him. A pastor who wants to visit them and says that he has a clear conscience, he desires to do what is right, and he wants them to pray for him, not for his success or his well-being, but so that he can come back and visit them again, be restored to them. And so that makes me almost believe that this particular leader might be in prison. We don't know, but that's what it talks about. So the pastor himself, in this particular case, this writer, is not looking for his own popularity. He wants to be with his people. And the benediction then is really quite incredible. I know this episode is a little longer than most. He wants that the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus Christ, the great shepherd of the sheep, the blood of the eternal covenant, equip you with everything good so that you may do his will and working in us that is pleasing in his sight. Through Jesus Christ, who be the glory forever and ever. Amen. And this is really kind of an interesting phrase because, first of all, God is a God of peace. I'm sure there were people who didn't wish God to be a God of peace. They wanted vengeance, probably from the Romans, and that's the idea. But instead, that this is a kind of a warning that the God of peace is there. And that doesn't mean your life is going to be absent of trouble, but instead be assured that the right relationship with God is through Christ. And he brought again from the dead. So we bring it out again that this is the only direct mention of the resurrection in the entire book of Hebrews. But the writer himself says that Christ's priesthood, his sacrifice, his entrance into the holy place, all rests on the fact that he is alive. The resurrection is the validation of everything. All of this happens. Everything I've been saying is validated by the fact that he was raised from the dead and is alive at this very moment. The great shepherd of the sheep, it reminds me again of Psalms 23. There's Ezekiel 34, where God promises to shepherd his scattered people. Remember the sheep that are out on the field lost. He's going to bring them home again and rejoice when the sheep are brought home. In John 10, it even talks about the shepherd who abandons his flock is not God. He is the great shepherd, the one who laid down his life for his sheep and took it up again. And then by the blood of the eternal covenant, and that means that the blood of Christ, the sacrifices that being made is no longer being made of these bulls and these animal sacrifices. It came right from the body of Christ. And his blood now is that eternal covenant. The Mosaic covenant was ratified by blood through the sacrifice. This is now a better blood. This is the blood of the Son of God, better than all the things, better than the blood of Abel. All of this is now permanent because Christ is eternal. And now we have the eternal sacrifice that was made, and that's it once and for all. And so it's going to restore us in that relationship that we want to do working in us so that we're pleasing in his sight. So that's, like I said, the comment I was making before. So it goes back and talks about that his blood is working in us that is pleasing in his sight. This is really kind of a really great statement, and I thought this was probably the most interesting of the chapter, that it's not just God who is calling us to live faithful lives. He's also working within us, and that's what pleases him. It is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. That was in Philippians 2:13. We're not just saying, well, Christ made the sacrifice, ta-da, we're done. Christ's growth is not merely human effort. It is God actively working in his people, but we are going to do things pleasing to God with that help, with that additional oomph to help us along, and that we're going to keep working, not to gain our salvation. I keep saying that importantly, but instead to help us to start doing the things that are pleasing towards God. And in this chapter, we talked about a lot of them. And so he appeals to everyone in this particular case. He says, "For I've written to you briefly," but he also wants to let them know that Timothy has been released. Was he released from prison, or was he released from an obligation he had to maybe do a particular work, like working in Ephesus, and now he's going to come back to them. And he says he hopes to see them soon with all your leaders and all the saints, and who come send you greetings. Grace be to you. And then he appeals to them, that brothers, to bear his words of exhortation, what he is asking them to do, what he's pointing out that they're slipping away slowly. And this brief letter to you, you should know that Timothy now has been released. We don't know if that has been released through an earthly commitment, or was he released from prison? And he wants to, for whom I shall see you if he comes soon. So that's the hope. He wants to say, hey, to all the leaders and the saints, and to those who come from Italy, they send their greetings as well. That might be interesting because, again, some people thought that these were Jewish people who were of Roman descent, but were Jewish and now Christian, and they had been maybe expelled from Rome. They were fleeing, and these are people in their home communities saying hi. And that indicates that this group of people in Hebrews is outside of Italy, so they're not Romans, and they're basically doing that. And again, grace be with all of you. It's such a closing, warm, personal message to them. He wants them to follow through, to understand what he was saying in this particular letter, and he wants them to bear with it. Bear with it kind of gives the impression he knows it's going to be hard, but he wants to do that. Timothy would have been a known character, someone traveling with Paul. And again, he hopes to travel with him to visit them soon. And like I said, the whole historical puzzle in all of this was that last part about Italy. And like I said, it's something that we'll have to find out in heaven. But I thought it was kind of nice. Anyway, I hope that helps with all of this. This letter that was full of warning and encouragement, and the 12 chapters of careful argument of who Christ is and why he is important and why he is the final high priest and his work is finished. And then one practical chapter of application. This is how you apply it. That's the ending right there. And boy, that is a fantastic ending indeed. I hope you've enjoyed Hebrews as much as I've enjoyed Hebrews. I really think that it's just been really incredible with that. And so this big picture of people who are suffering and then telling them, come back, don't fade away. The unshakable fact that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God will never leave you. And the great shepherd brought from the dead is still tending after his flocks. He is now going to equip you to do everything he calls you to do. That's the incredible takeaway of the end of the book of Hebrews. What I'm going to meditate on is the idea that right from the very moment, yesterday, today, and forever, each timeline is covered in 7 words. We live in a world that changes constantly. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's horrible, sometimes it's just disorienting, and sometimes it's in a way that's not pleasing to God. We have leaders that we have trusted that are gone. And the situation we counted on is now shifting. I think about that leader's part quite a bit because I lost my pastor who baptized me, and I thought we were going to have a long, long relationship. So the world looks different. It always does. It looks different than it was 5 years ago. It's going to look different in 5 years from now. And our own lives are marked by change and loss and transition and uncertainty and things we didn't ask for. And in all of that, this verse is basically saying Christ does not drift. He does not revise. He is the same. He is not more gracious. He was mean and now he's nice. He does not change. What he was in the wilderness of Israel, present, faithful, sustaining, he is now. He is in the end of all things, glorious, triumphant. And he already is right now, right today. The Jesus who wept at Lazarus' tomb sits at the throne of the right hand of God the Father. The Jesus who welcomes children and touched lepers is the same Jesus you're bringing your prayers to right now. And so that settles deeply in us, and I'm going to spend a lot of time meditating about that. He is the one that does not change. What I'm going to pray about is that I often, I change the way everything else does. Sometimes I have confident days and some days I have no confidence. Some days I feel good about my circumstances and sometimes I feel shaky. And we have to come to God. I pray to God that I can come to him boldly when things are going well and boldly when I feel things are not going that well, that I can be joyous and praising God when things are well and same thing when things are not so well. The fact is, if we feel that God is drifting from us, it is us that's drifting. And so I pray that God forgives me about that because we know that he does not drift. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And when I'm anxious, I guess I want to be reminded of that fact. It's tempting to drift towards safety in our lives, and he anchors us to him. So if we're tired, if we're scared, if we have fear, he is our great shepherd. And I always want to remember that. And what I'm going to share with other people is this idea that God's faithfulness has been consistent in our lives, even if our lives have changed. It doesn't have to be, dramatic. He comes through, sometimes quiet, a provision you needed but you didn't expect, a peace that held you together when you had no reason, that stayed with you, through hard times. When you're in your life and you need to hear God who does not change, a friend navigating something that's difficult in an uncertain place, or a family member who is doubting, You don't have to stay perfect. You don't have to have the perfect theological explanation. You can simply share with that idea. God has been faithful. He still is faithful. He will forever be faithful. He is never changing. All right, everyone, thanks so much. Appreciate you being out here. Like I said, this was a particularly long one, and I wanted to give it a lot of significance because it is a real wrapping up of everything we talked about in Hebrews. If you need to email me, you can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. Thanks so much and have a great day.